This video is about white terrorism in the US, and I'm using the example of the New York conspiracy of 1741, a big trial here. So, first, I'm going to tell you the elements of white terrorism. The purpose, usually, of white terrorism is to maintain white supremacy, to ensure that white people have the most power, the highest positions, and most possessions. And usually, some other elements, you often have a white woman or a group of white women playing a significant role in the terrorism. And it's carried out usually by a posse of white people. Also, the violence is usually government led or government permitted because people are not given any consequence for the damage that they caused. So, and usually again, it starts out as a response to some threat to the white supremacist position. So back in 1741, there was an economic decline, and so a conflict of some sort arose between poor whites and enslaved people. Now, understand the conflict is not real because enslaved people have no real power. So white people were upset, saying that enslaved people are taking their jobs, basically, like they'll say about the immigrants. Well, enslaved people did not decide to come here to look for jobs. So, I'm sure they would have liked to be freed from their unpaid jobs and given them to the white people. So, not long after that, and this is happening in the spring, we'll see a set of fires are set, and then the blame goes to the black people that they're the ones setting the fire, and there's a conspiracy of black enslaved people and a few white people, usually white people that are not WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They're prime target. They're on the bottom then. So yeah, there's this theory that they're trying to take over New York. This is very similar to the witch hunts that took place in Salem in the 1700s. So yeah, so here we are. Here are the elements I told you. So there's a white man who's Judge Daniel Horsemanden, and he was a judge and he acted as the investigator of the crimes and also as the judge. So he was the judge, juror, and executioner of people. And one of his key witnesses, at first she was reluctant, but then she joined in wholeheartedly. Her name was Mary Burton. She was 16 years old, an Irish indentured servant. Mary worked in a bar. And so at first, Mary told the truth about a crime that had to do with some enslaved people stealing. Now, my position, enslaved people cannot steal. In my culture, we have a saying, a thief who steals from another thief makes God laugh. If you're stealing somebody's labor and they take something from you, it's just them taking their pay. But I won't digress into that. So Mary would tell stories of people who are trying to cause an insurrection. And so after the fire, we see 200 people brought into the basement of City Hall. So that's why I'm showing you City Hall in the first slide. And a lot of them were burned, hung, and placed in. And when they were killed, they were buried in the African burial ground. So those are some of the bodies that are still down there in Wall Street. Then this terrorism continued. This white terrorism continued. So more confession, forced confession. And the confessions would be gotten through violence, of course. Enslaved people would be beaten and heckled by white people. And so the confessions were forced. and it would only stop because it serves a purpose. It only stopped when someone commented that murdering enslaved people, burning them and hanging them is like burning up money. So they didn't stop out of humanity, they stopped out of this is not economically viable. And some of the reactions, the consequence of this trial, this conspiracy that historians and most historians agree that nothing was being planned, was that they created more restrictive slave codes and they forbid the importation of slaves from the Caribbean because the Caribbean was 75% of the enslaved people who came into New York City. And the reason they said they no longer wanted slaves from the Caribbean was because they said they were more likely to organize and fight against them. Instead, they wanted people from Africa because they would not organize. And just that's because, there are different tribes there. They might not speak the same language, but the enslaved people from the Caribbean had already figured out how to speak one language. So they were not correct. They were correct. And so you have to know that all white terrorism, whether it's today or back in 1741, it might seem like it just erupts, but no, it's very deliberate. It's very intentional. The whole point is to seize power from any group of people who are not white and to get their possession, to return the balance of things where white people get the most of everything and the other people get the least. And we can see many examples of that in Black Wall Street when the people were thriving there. They wanted their possession, so they went in there and they destroyed a thriving city. Just stuff like that. It's deliberate. So what is the takeaway that we can have from that? They told you in the punishment that they gave, what they restricted is Black people gathering together. So whenever they restrict gathering together, whenever there's white terrorism, the more we gather together, the better off we are, the more we organize together. And since often the government is in support or allowing it to happen, sometimes we have to appeal to higher governments, such as entities like the UN, entities as like the world at large, which is easier now for us to appeal to by using the internet, by documenting with pictures and appealing sometimes if you find it impossible to live in the US, to appeal for temporary asylum or refugee status in other countries where there have better conditions for people based on race or gender. So just like white terrorism is planned and structured and never, as they're trying to let you think, just occurring randomly by crazy people. No, it's planned. Same, you should have a plan of how to counter white terrorism through self-defense, through organization, and through appealing to moral entities.